Hi, I'm Charlie Pasterfield. I'm an editor at Crutchfield. I've been working at Crutchfield for 24 years. Before that, I was a professional musician, played up and down the East Coast, out in as far as Indiana for many, many years. And I just wanted to start off by saying I'm not really an audiophile, but I am a musician, and that's the most important thing to me is having great sounding music in my house. I played in a band with my friend Corky for years, and Corky started Crutchfield. As I was putting together my last band, I used to got to borrow money from him and other people who worked there, and I'd slowly noticed that every bartender, every musician, every restaurant owner that I knew was working at Crutchfield now, and I asked somebody about it. I said, "Oh yeah, they love to hire people who've been in the food business or in the music business because they like working in a situation like this and not having to travel." So as soon as I found that out, I came out for my interview. The guy who interviewed me started off by saying, "Well, tell me about your previous work experience." And I said, "Well, I really can't because I've never had a full-time job." And he picked up his pad and he looked, he said, "You mean to tell me you're 44 years old and you've never had a full-time job?" I said, "Yeah, that's correct." And he goes, "Dude, you are so hired." And I got the job right on the spot, which that doesn't happen anymore. You have to go through some tests and stuff. But it's been a beautiful place to work because all my friends work there. There's a lot of music people there, and we just talk about music stuff all day long. There's nothing better than that. So this whole thing started a few years ago when I got a set of Polk LSI 25 tower speakers. And I got a great deal on them, and I couldn't pass it up. But what I did know is that they were going to ruin my life because once I got them home and turned everything on and heard the sound that was coming out, something inside my brain said, find other things that sound this good. And a friend of mine, Rick, had sold me an old dual turntable that I hooked up to the Polks, and that got me listening to records again for the first time in decades. I then needed a preamp for my NAD that I had, my integrated amplifier, so I acquired that NAD phono preamp. The Polk tower speakers have built-in subs at the bottom, so you don't need a ton of power. And then I got a great deal on an Oppo disc player. So I had the dual turntable for a couple of years listening to records, and then I got a chance to get a Project debut Carbon Esprit turntable. And I bought that and I brought it home, and I was really impressed by the sound of that. And after a few weeks of fiddling with it, I called my audiophile buddy Bill, and he came over and listened to it and said, "Yeah, man, that's a great sounding turntable. The system sounds fantastic." The next day he calls me up and says, "I really hate to do this to you, but I got a deal that I got to tell you about." And then it turns out he'd worked in a high-end music store up near D.C. in the 80s, and he'd sold a Lynn Sondek LP12 turntable to this guy who'd owned it ever since. And over the years, he put over $7,000 of upgrades into it. And that includes a separate power supply, an upgraded suspension, a new tone arm, a new cartridge, a moving low output moving coil cartridge, and a bunch of other stuff. And you have to think, who in the world would spend that kind of money on upgrading a turntable? But Bill said it's an amazing deal. So I saved up some money, bought the turntable, and he and his friend Carl came down to install it. And they set it up and went through my system, checking the phase on everything and demagnetizing this and doing all kinds of stuff. So when they get done, Carl puts on a record that he knows really well, sits down, gets up, takes the record off, repositions my speakers to the point that he actually adjusted the height of the spikes so they were identical on both sides. And he finally said, "All right, take a listen, see what you think." I said, "Well, what I really want to play first is an old James Brown cut. That's a really well recorded cut." And he said, "Well, that turntable's not going to know what to do because it's only played classical music all its life, but have at it." So I put it on, and I'm not exaggerating anyway. I cranked it up, and had the pleasure of seeing James Brown several times live, and the feeling just came back as strong as it could be of being at a live show. The sound of it was identical, and I don't know, that just sold me right on the spot. I've always had moderate, just decent stereo systems, and really no desire. In fact, when I run into friends of mine who bought ridiculous stereo systems, I thought, what a waste of money. What can they possibly hear that I don't hear with my system? But at my advanced stage, I'm slowly finding out what is possible with audio. And it's, like when I got that new turntable, it wasn't a life changing moment really so much as just every time I put a record on that I knew, it was just presented in a whole different way. And it's hard to put into words what that difference is, but it has to do with every instrument being cleanly and clearly reproduced when you're kind of accustomed to their all being kind of jumbled together. I started playing music in high school a long, long time ago, and I was fortunate. I lived next door on my freshman year to a guy, Fairleigh Stanton Dickinson III, same Fairleigh Dickinson as the university, and he was an amazing guitar player even when he was 14, and he kind of carried me and a couple of other guys on his back through high school. He would show us what to play. And so I learned a lot, and I played in a really good band in high school. And we all planned on continuing to play together in college. We all applied to the same school. But I didn't get in. I came down to UVA instead and started making great money playing frat parties down here, and realized, my friends in New England were not doing so well playing music. So I decided to stay here, and I've been playing music professionally ever since I got out of college. In 1826, when UVA was getting ready to open, somebody in North Carolina sent a little tree, to Thomas Jefferson, and he planted it on the lawn, and it grew up to be called the McGuffey Ash. It was a gigantic tree that 20 years ago, unfortunately, was hit by lightning and it died. So they hired my friend Dave, who's a furniture maker, to make little tables and chairs and other things they could put in the houses on the lawn. He had one board left over, and he threw it in a scrap pile. So years later, I go by to visit him to see about putting a guitar together made out of chestnut. And right before I got there, he was arguing on the phone with someone and threw a tool over his shoulder, went into the scrap pile of wood, and when he dug down, just as I was walking the door, he picked up the piece of wood from the McGuffey Ash. And I had my Telecaster with me. And Dave said, wow, this might be a great thing to make a Telecaster out of. So he took out my Tele, measured it, and measured the piece of wood, and it was exactly the size of a Telecaster. So he ended up making the world's only Thomas Jefferson Telecaster for me and gave it to me, which is the greatest thing that anyone has ever done. And it's a great guitar. It's the only guitar he's ever made, and he's never made another one, but it is an amazing Telecaster. What a beauty. God. Okay, so that's my home audio system. Thanks so much for watching. And if you're thinking about putting together a system like this for yourself, give Crutchfield a call. We've got advisors who really, really know what they're talking about.